My name is Katherine and I'm an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I co-led this project with Jacqueline Rifkin, who's an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And Jacqueline will be taking over this presentation in the second half. And finally, this project was also in collaboration with Jonah Berger, who's an associate professor of marketing at the University of Pennsylvania. In our work, we explore how we might leverage the power of self-expression to encourage consumers to be a little bit more pro-social. I want to begin by telling you about the inspiration for this research. While I was a doctoral student at Duke University, I began to notice these interesting dueling tip jars at the various local cafes that I would work in. In an attempt at increasing their tips, I would see baristas putting out these jars to represent all kinds of clever dueling topics like puppies versus kittens or LeBron James versus Michael Jordan. And the idea with these duels, of course, is that customers place their tip in the jar labeled with their favorite option. Before I knew it, I was seeing these clever duels pop up more and more often on cafe counters. And at one point, I even saw the ASPCA using a very similar strategy to elicit donations. So I brought this up with my friend Jacqueline, who also did her doctoral studies at Duke. And she and I started wondering if this approach really worked to increase tips or donations. I mean, we kind of assumed that the tactic worked given that baristas and organizations were using it, but it would be important to really scientifically confirm its effectiveness. And furthermore, we really wanted to know why this tactic worked. So we decided to pursue research on this topic, but first we needed to give it some kind of general label. So we chose to label this approach the dueling preferences tactic. And we define that as when the act of pro-social giving, which could be tipping to someone else or donating to someone else, is framed as a choice between two options. Next, we ran a series of experiments to test whether this tactic really increased giving, and if so, why. So first, we ran a field experiment in a local cafe. Every hour for a single business day, Jacqueline and I inconspicuously alternated whether a standard tip jar or a cats versus dogs dueling tip jars appeared on the counter at the cafe. And she and I sat in a corner table counting the number of patrons who chose to place a tip in whatever jar or jars they encountered. And we found that the dueling preferences tactic led to about 77% of customers to tip, whereas the standard tip jar led to about 41%. In other words, we nearly doubled the percentage of patrons who left a tip using this approach. Beyond tips, we were also interested in seeing if we could apply this tactic to increase donations, which is, of course, another very crucial type of pro-social gift. So we ran an online experiment in which participants either saw a standard donation appeal or a chocolate versus vanilla dueling donation appeal, both of which were to raise money for the American Red Cross. While the standard donation appeal led to about 37% of participants leaving some kind of donation, the dueling donation appeal increased that to 54% and also increased the total dollar amount donated to the Red Cross by nearly 30%. So together, these two simple experiments made us feel pretty confident that this dueling preferences tactic indeed effectively increases at least smaller pro-social gifts. So then we set off to explore why this tactic increases giving. And this is the part of research where we as consumer psychologists tend to get really excited because we really wonder what aspect of human psychology drives this, what makes it effective. Well, we know from prior research that people really enjoy and have this fundamental intrinsic desire to express who they are. And in fact, reward centers in our brains become active when we get the chance to say something about who we are, similar to how these reward centers become active when we win cash or eat a tasty treat. We suggest that because people have this intrinsic desire to self-express, they should be willing to pay to engage in it. And so dueling preferences boosts pro-social gifts because it provides consumers with such an opportunity to self-express valued identities or preferences.
Based on our findings about why dueling preferences works, we can provide a roadmap for how best to implement it. First things first, offer a choice. Our studies show that this tactic is most effective with two opposing preferences, like chocolate versus vanilla, dueling against each other. Second, make your content relevant. Because this tactic is powered by the drive to express ourselves, it's most effective when duels capture simple but engaging issues, like summer versus winter, mountains versus beach, or chocolate versus vanilla. By that same token, when we tried a duel that was pretty unengaging, preference for the letter A versus the letter B, we weren't able to increase giving. So just having two dueling options isn't enough. We have to think carefully and craft our duel around issues that our donors are going to care about. Third, we know from psychology research and from real life that people differ in how much they like to express themselves. Sometimes we want to share openly and freely when we're with our friends, for instance, whereas at other times we might want to keep our opinions a little bit closer to the vest, like maybe in a more professional situation. This also varies with different personality types. We have found that the dueling preferences tactic is most effective among people who naturally prefer to express themselves. And finally, avoid controversial topics. I probably don't have to convince you that there are plenty of things that we just don't really want to share. And this would translate into duels that don't work. In fact, we tested a Democrats versus Republicans duel around the 2016 presidential election, and that proved ineffective at raising donations, likely because it was such a heated and uncomfortable election. So anything that we might want to avoid expressing, like embarrassing information or taboo information, is not going to be well suited to the dueling preferences approach. So let's zoom out now for a minute and think about the reason that we're all here today, which is thinking about how this research can help us build a better world. As we are all aware, while prosocial giving is critical, it's really not happening enough. Just one data point, there's over 6 million tipped workers in the United States, and these workers are twice as likely to be living in poverty or depending on food stamps relative to the general population. This dueling preferences tactic can start to ease this burden by motivating prosocial giving. And not only is it simple, effective, and a cheap method for doing so, but we're also able to offer this roadmap for sort of best practices at implementation. What's interesting is that this tactic is able to ease this burden by allowing people to be a little bit selfish. And let me explain what I mean by that. As prosocial organizations, the challenge is always to get people to be a little bit less focused on themselves and instead be more generous with others. But with dueling preferences, these two things are not necessarily at odds. This tactic allows for some self-centeredness in that people are kind of expressing their own preferences and opinions. So put really simply, with dueling preferences, givers get to express themselves while being generous to others. We're really excited about this work and the questions that it has unearthed. One first question is understanding how this tactic works if it is employed repeatedly over time. So imagine for a minute that you get a fundraising email that employs a cats versus dogs duel, and ideally this will encourage you to donate. But then imagine a few weeks later, another fundraising email lands in your inbox with the same duel, and then a few weeks later, the same duel. How would this make you feel, and how would it change your likelihood to give? Given what we know from the research, it's possible that this could start to feel pretty boring or repetitive. If I already told you that I prefer dogs over cats, how many more times can I tell you this and it still feel kind of interesting and motivating? So while self-expression is really great and desirable, we still need to explore what it feels like to do it over and over again. A second question is how giving to a duel at one point in time shapes long-term support for an organization. The goal with any fundraising effort is to convert a donor into a repeat donor. And so we're curious to know how well the dueling preferences tactic works at doing this. If I give to a duel at one point in time, will I naturally convert into a repeat donor? Or will I require additional new duels to continually stay engaged? A final research direction that we're particularly excited about is whether the dueling preferences approach can be leveraged to help with other socially beneficial outcomes beyond just tipping and donating. So a few things that we've thought of are canned food drives or clothing drives. You can imagine two barrels positioned side by side, one that says Yankees and one that says Red Sox. This could be applied even to dueling clipboards that have spaces to sign up for volunteer shifts or mentoring opportunities or even vaccine appointments. What about trash or cigarette butts? This is actually a real trash bin pictured here that was launched by a company called Ballot Bin that's in the UK. So these bins encourage people to throw their cigarette butts into either compartment based on their preferences. And we have seen some reports suggesting that these ballot bins have been able to reduce cigarette litter by up to 80% in some neighborhoods. So really, we're hoping to have only just scraped the surface of the power of dueling preferences. So with that, on behalf of Katherine, Jonah, and I want to thank you for your attention, and we're really excited to discuss with you all more in the second hour. Thanks.
First of all, thank you, Gita and John, for organizing this wonderful event, and thank you all for attending our session. So my name is Kuangjie Zhang. I am an assistant professor at NTU Singapore, and I'm very excited to share with you our research on how price promotions can influence people's donation behavior. And this research is in joint work with my wonderful collaborators, Fengyan from Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and Zhengyu from the University of Hong Kong. So let me begin by first talk about how we actually started this project. So all the three of us actually enjoy shopping a lot, right? And especially when there are big sales. And we know for a fact that these big sales events are very successful, right? So in Western cultures, you have the Black Friday sales, you have the Cyber Monday sales, and in Asia, you have the global shopping festival called the Double 11 sales, which is also known as the Singles Day sales by Alibaba. And we know that these price promotion events lead to big commercial success for the companies. And because of that, there are also a lot of new companies that actually try to invent new price promotion events. Like in Singapore, we recently have like 7 price promotion day and etc. But at the same time, there are also a lot of criticisms and concerns about this increasing materialism or consumerism related to those shopping events, right? So for example, the media portrays Black Friday as America's greatest holiday. And also there are a lot of organizations that are actually calling for boycotting these kind of sales events. Right, so that leads to our sort of research question, which is, are price promotions really that bad for the society? And can price promotions actually lead to some positive social consequence? And in order to do that, what we did is that we actually got the data from a very large charitable organization in China, which is called Free Lunch for Children. So we tracked the donation data to this charity for the whole month of November in 2016. And what we discovered is actually there seems to be a very interesting pattern, right? So as you can see on the graph, immediately after the Double 11 sales event, which by the way happens on November 11th, there is actually a peak of donation to this charity from the Tmall platform, which is the same platform that runs the Double 11 sales. But we don't observe this effect for donations through other channels. Right, so that got us thinking, and so basically this is our key idea, which is that we argue that the price promotions can actually increase people's perceived resources. And this greater perceived resources can actually come from both the actual monetary savings consumers derive from the taking part of price promotions, as well as the subjective feeling of saving money, right? And we argue that this greater kind of perceived resource after participating in price promotions can increase consumers' donation behavior. So we tested our sort of hypothesis in multiple studies. And for the interest of time, I'll only present a few studies. So in the first study, we actually surveyed the Chinese shoppers who actually participated in the Double 11 sales, right? And we asked people very simple questions. We first asked people to recall how much money they spent on their purchase during the Double 11 sales. And then we asked people how much money they actually perceive they have saved during the sales event. And lastly, we asked people to indicate whether they have engaged any of the certain types of charitable behaviors, such as donating money to charities since November 11th. Okay, and we discovered some very interesting finding, which is that the more people spend on the sales event, the more money they actually felt they have saved, right? And also what we discovered is that people's self-reported charitable behavior increase as they spend more in the sales event. And of course, this is only correlational data. So what we did next is that we actually collaborated with a cafe in Shanghai to run a field experiment. Right, so we had two conditions, and basically in the promotion condition, we give people a 10 renminbi coupon discount on their purchase of a drink when they come to the cafe. And in the control conditions, there is no promotion, right? And by the way, 10 renminbi is equivalent to about $2 US. So after people make the payment, they receive a receipt together with a donation appeal flyer. Right? And on this flyer, we talked about a woman who was diagnosed with leukemia, and she's in need of help with her medical expense. Right? And we made sure this was a real donation cause from a Chinese charitable platform, and she was not related to the cafe. And we have a QR code that is attached to the flyer. So the customers can actually just scan the QR code, and they can decide whether they want to donate or they want like how much money they would like to donate, right? So what we discovered is actually that the promotion condition actually significantly increased people's donation rate as well as people's donation amount as compared to the control condition. And we also did a few more studies to understand what are the factors that might potentially make this effect stronger or weaker, right? So for example, one of the factors that we discovered was that the immediacy of the savings seems to matter. In other words, the effect seems to be stronger when the promotion offers immediate savings to consumers, right? So what we did is that in a different field experiment, we introduced a third condition, which is a rebate condition, right? So in the rebate condition, people receive a coupon, but they cannot use the coupon on their current purchase. So they can only use the coupon on their future purchase. And the other two conditions were sort of similar to the previous study. And again, we measured people's actual donation. So we found that only the instant discount conditions seem to help the donation behavior. However, the rebate condition doesn't seem to help, right? And in the next study, we also showed that basically the time interval between the price promotion and the donation solicitation seems to matter. In other words, it's more effective if you solicit donation from consumers right after the promotion as compared to, after delay, right? So we basically did another survey, which is similar to the first study. The only difference is that we either survey people immediately after the sales, or we surveyed people like at least 1 week afterwards, right? So we basically found that when the customers were surveyed immediately after the promotion, their donation intention was significantly related to their spending in the promotion event. But as the time gap increases, the effect seems to be attenuated. right? So our research actually provides very important indications for a better world in the sense that our research suggests that the companies and charitable organizations, they can actually collaborate together to create a win-win situation that can benefit both sides, right? And also our research answers three very important questions, right? So the first question is, who should you target? And what we're saying is that you should actually target the consumers who have just participated in price promotions, because these are the people who felt having more resources and they might be more likely to donate. And in terms of the timing, we are saying that it's more effective if you solicit donations right after the price promotion. And recently, there is actually a global movement called Giving Tuesday, which it actually happens right after the Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And we believe that our research actually provides a very good explanation for the success of this Giving Tuesday event. And also, we're saying that if you pair donation appeals with promotions that offer immediate discounts, that's going to be more effective. And of course, there are also some emerging research questions. For example, in our research, we mostly looked at monetary donation behaviors. Although in study one, we seem to find for non-monetary donations that also seem to work. But I think future research can also look at whether this phenomena could be generalizable to other types of non-monetary donation behaviors, right? Of course, future research can also look at, could this effect be more prominent among certain segment of consumers, like maybe the people who are more value conscious, more deal prone, might actually be more likely to show this kind of effect, right? So that's another kind of interesting question. And lastly, I think from the firm's perspective, I think it's also interesting to understand how companies and firms can actually leverage this phenomenon to actually create this win-win situation that can potentially maximize societal welfare, right? Which sort of works for both sides. So I think this is kind of an interesting empirical question that also needs more future research on. So that's essentially what I have for today. And thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to the discussion in the next hour.
Hello, everyone. Aloha. I'm going to talk about a paper titled Managing Members, Donors, and Member Donors for Effective Fundraising, Effective Nonprofit Fundraising. My name is Sungjin Kim, and I'm an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Hawaii. This paper is based on one of the chapters in my dissertation while I was a PhD student at Cornell. I wrote this paper with my two advisors, Professor Sachin Gupta and Professor Clarence Lee. In 2019, US households gave nearly 2% of their annual income to nonprofit organizations. Individual giving constitutes 75% of the total giving to charities, and the rest coming from foundations, corporations, and bequests. Half of the newly acquired donors turn after they give once, and the average ratio of fundraising cost to donation is almost 12%. To summarize, it is known that nonprofit organizations rely heavily on individual giving, and Americans are very generous. But still, nonprofit organizations struggle to keep givers, and the fundraising is very expensive. So it is important to invest in ways to keep generous givers and to predictably identify them and nurture them from the early stage of the relationship. In this paper, we try to answer following three questions using an econometric model. What factors influence the choices of multiple forms of giving and amount, and how do their effects change over time? How can the nonprofit organization employ our framework to increase participation rate and contribution amount? Can we predict which contributors are more committed to the nonprofit organization? These research questions have not been clearly answered in the literature and require a model to be answered. Many nonprofit organizations such as Smithsonian, the Nature Conservancy, and the nonprofit organization that we studied here, which wanted to be anonymous, elicit financial resources through donation as well as membership. To incorporate this reality, our model has 3 distinguishing features. First, our model separates participation from amount. This is important because it allows nonprofit organizations to understand what to emphasize. Is it participation? Is it amount? Or is it both? This turns out to be very important, as we will see. Second, our model allows for multiple forms of giving, such as membership and donation. And most past literature did not distinguish them and just thought about dollar giving. And this can disguise large differences between givers. Third, the model incorporates dynamics of giving, such as effects of lifetime, recency, and seasonality. And as I mentioned, repeat giving is a major consideration, so understanding how giving behavior changes over time is very important. We obtained the current data set from large nonprofit scientific research center, or in short, SRC. And the mission of the SRC is to promote environmental and natural causes by studying on animal species. There are over 100,000 individuals who financially support the SRC, and there are many more volunteers who participate in citizen science programs. In this research, we consider 2 forms of financial giving, donation and membership. If people donate, they don't receive any benefits from SRC, whereas if people give through membership programs, they receive some benefits such as magazines, mugs, umbrellas, and so on, depending on their membership tiers. The SRC sends appeals for donation and membership, and we have this information as well. These figures show the mean giving amount and frequency by 3 groups: pure donors, pure members, and member donors. Pure donors and pure members are those who give only through donation and membership respectively throughout the observational period, whereas member donors are those who give through both donation and membership. And as graph shows, these 3 groups behave very differently over time. The red line indicates that the member donor group gives more and more frequently over time, whereas the other 2 groups, pure donors and pure members, tend to give less and less frequently over time. So it is important for fundraisers to predictably identify who are going to be member donors in the future. Through the model estimation, we found the following. The propensity to donate increases over time since the first giving occasion, which means people tend to repeatedly give through donation, or members tend to add donation to their giving portfolio. On the other hand, we did not find such an increasing pattern in the membership. Instead, the propensity to participate in membership programs over the lifetime is rather cyclical, with peaks every 12 months. We also find different preferences to give over time since the last giving occasion. For donation, the utility of repeat giving is low for the first 7 months, and then it peaks 11 and 12 months after giving. But after 24 months, there is no positive predisposition to donate again. On the other hand, lapsed members remain positively predisposed for a duration longer than 2 years. Therefore, it is worth continuing to solicit for members for longer duration. We find that appeal responsiveness to donation is generally inconsistent, whereas responsiveness for membership is quite effective. We think this is because membership is naturally targeted to reach individuals just before their membership was about to expire. Last but not least, we find substantial heterogeneity in the individuals' giving preferences. And a lot of individual variation is explained by observed variables such as age, gender, and the distance from the SRC, which is not surprising in general. It may be driven by individual differences in attitudes toward mission of the SRC. Also, there are substantial unobserved heterogeneity, and we control for unobserved heterogeneity using a model. We used the proposed model to predict which pure members would become member donors and which pure donors would become member donors. To do this counterfactual analysis, we used the first 2/3 of the data for the estimation and predict the last 1/3 of the data for the test. Specifically, in the estimation period, there are 284 pure donors, and among them, 52 pure donors became member donors in the test period. If we randomly choose half of these individuals, we would expect to identify half of those 52 pure donors who will become member donors in the test period. And this 45-degree line indicates the baseline performance without a model. And this red line indicates the gain from our model. For example, our model helps to identify 90% of the member donors if we choose 50% of pure donors. So this 40% gap is the gain from our model. We also test the predictive accuracy of the restricted models, which omit some components of our model. These blue, yellow, green, purple lines indicate the predictive accuracy of each restricted model. And as we can see, the predictive accuracy of the reduced model is worse than the full model, which means our model was not overfitted and has better predictive accuracy. We find similar findings for pure members to member donors case as well. These gains charts show how our model can help fundraisers predictably identify member donors. And again, this is practically very important because member donors tend to give more and more frequently over time, and therefore their lifetime value is higher than pure donors and pure members. As another managerial implication, we calculate the appeal elasticities for different targeting appeal scenarios. And we have shown that our model can help fundraisers develop targeting strategies for more effective appeal campaigns. And the SRC can expect 1.5 to 2% increase in revenue by sending targeted appeals. Based on the results that I've shown here, we made the following insights for fundraiser. First, multiple options to give a pathway for committed givers, such as member donors. Second, emphasize participation, not amount. This is something that I did not fully show in this short presentation, but in a nutshell, emphasizing participation turns out to be much more productive than emphasizing amount. Third, treat long-lapsed donors as new prospects and don't give up lapsed members too soon. Fourth, optimize the timing of appeals. In this current paper, we focus on the evolution of givers after first giving. But in our new project, we considered the acquisition process. Specifically, we examined the role of volunteering as a gateway to becoming a financial contributor. We are finding that a promotional activity to engage individuals in citizen science has large effect on volunteering participation, but also downstream consequences of financial giving. So marketing has important effects in this domain. Another potential open question from our study is that we found that changing the how much to give decision is extremely hard to change, whereas whether to participate in donation or membership was relatively easy. And as far as I know, we don't have exact answer why this happens. Also in this research, we didn't have cost information of running multiple giving options. So we cannot really say that the benefits of having more member donors outweigh the cost of running multiple programs. So it is an open question, what is the effective and cost-saving organization design? These are some of the future works that we have identified. Thank you for your time. In Hawaii, we say mahalo. So mahalo, everyone.